Hey everyone, welcome back to another stream. Just making sure everything's right. Let me know in the comments below, if in the chat below, if the audio is right, if the video is right, if everything looks right. And we'll start very soon. So the motive of this stream is going to be discussing the front-end web developer technologies, right? The things which you need to become a good front-end web developer. We're going to be seeing all the mess that has been created and everything that has been, everything that is there more or less in 2021 web development front, especially in front end. And we will also be discussing how you can become a great front-end web developer, what it takes to become a great front-end web developer. And yeah, just wanted to discuss a few things live, take up a few questions. Everyone in the chat, hello to everyone. Just so you know that I'm reading all of your chats, and I will be taking up questions later down the line. So if that is something you are waiting for, we will be doing that later on. All right, let's start with a few things which I have in mind. First of all, what exactly is front-end web development, right? So let me just zoom out, but increase the font size. You see, front-end web development, basically, you would know that it involves creating web pages of some sort, and if possible, linking it to a backend, or linking it to some sort of server which is responsible for logic processing. So on front end, usually the technologies which we work all the time are HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, right? So these are the three fundamental technologies which you need to know, irrespective of the time scale that has been so far till the web has been there. So whether you were a web developer in 2005 or whether you are a web developer in 2021, you still need to know, you still need to understand these three technologies at least in order to become a good front-end developer. Now, how about all the mess? How about we discuss all the mess that has been created in today's landscape? So you're going to start seeing technologies like React. You're going to start seeing technologies like Angular, Svelte. I'm just going to keep writing whatever comes to my mind in front-end web development. If you have any specific tool which you work with, leave the name of that in the chat. Make sure you know that it is a front-end web developer tool. So that's an important thing. So something like Webpack, Able, what else? Prettier is also there, although I won't call it a development tool. It's more of a code formatting thing. But on the React front, you will know Redux, and why is this gap there? Anyway, I guess we can just continue. So Redux is there. Then we have React Query, for example. I can pretty much tell a bunch of stuff in the React ecosystem. ESLint, somebody says ESLint is there. ESLint, Vue is there. These are nice suggestions. React Query is done. Tailwind Css is there, of course. Tailwind Css is there. What else? Bootstrap is there. Bootstrap. We also have Rollup is there again. Also, this new bundler ESBuild, which I just remembered, which surprisingly is super fast, right? Not really surprisingly, it's built on Golang, so it definitely is super fast. But yeah, Jquery is also there. I mean, you can say that Jquery still exists down the line. Post CSS, of course, Post CSS is also there. So tools like these exist, right? So Material UI is there. And we are probably just looking at React ecosystem right now. Parcel is there. Parcel is also there. So, so much to learn, so much to take a look at just in the front end web development world. D3 is also there, somebody's mentioned. So yeah, Snowpack is there. Snowpack is actually used by codedamn as well for some of the playgrounds. So I would say, you're going to soon realize that we can pretty much extend this list if we keep on digging tools to about, I don't know, 50, 60, 70 things, right? And it is often a source of confusion whether you should go ahead and start learning every single thing here. And this is just front end, right? If you want to develop some application on your own, you probably need to have a back end knowledge as well. If you want to implement, even if you take up Firebase, for example, as a backend as a service, you still need to understand the fundamentals. Database, what is a database? Storing it in a row column fashion, retrieving it. All these libraries, Axios comes to mind. You gotta learn a few syntax. Then within JavaScript also, you have so much to learn in terms of the browser API surface and so on and so forth. So I wanted to discuss what exactly is required out of all of this stuff and how you should approach it as someone who's starting off for the very first time. You just figure out that, hey, front end web development is something interesting, which seems like something I could do, and you wanted to get in. You wanted to take a shot at web development, see if you can make some money, or if this is something which interests you, anything on those lines. So how do you approach this mess of technologies? Well, the first thing is that you should pretty much not look at any of these technologies at all, right? Because what you will realize over the time is that you can learn a lot of things if you have the basic fundamentals strong. That means you know exactly what is happening when you're writing a piece of JavaScript code, or when you're animating something with CSS, or when you're creating that layout with CSS. So what I usually feel is that people skip these topics just because React is the cool thing now, or just because Angular is the cool thing now, or just because Vue is the cool thing now. I personally did the same thing. I did not just go ahead and focused 4 years on HTML, CSS, JavaScript, but I would often return on these topics again and again, multiple times. So I would take up React, for example, but I would keep on learning JavaScript on the side. Now, this is also sort of a misconception in the sense that people believe they need to be focused. It's a kind of it contradicts itself, but hear me out. Firstly, you should not really focus on two vastly different fields. For example, you should not start mobile application development and front-end web development together. They're pretty much different, and you will confuse yourself if you're trying to learn Kotlin or Java alongside with JavaScript. But inside the same industry, inside the same front-end, for example, web development, you can, in fact, pretty much learn things in parallel, right? So you can take up JavaScript and you can take up React. It's not that you have to be master of JavaScript and then move on to React. With that being said, I do believe that there is still a huge amount of people who take up React without actually clearing that threshold of JavaScript understanding, right? So there's pretty much a threshold for everyone, after which it will probably make a lot more sense for you to start picking up React. It differs from people to people. But yeah, if you're starting off picking up React as a first thing and then you are making your way back to JavaScript, it is pretty much wrong. You should start with JavaScript. You should start with HTML, CSS. You should come to a point where you feel comfortable enough to create at least medium-sized application. I mean, if you're not comfortable enough in creating a to-do list app with JavaScript, HTML, and CSS, and you're moving on to React, you're doing something wrong. That could be one of the criteria you can set, right? If you're not comfortable in creating a simple tic-tac-toe game just in JavaScript, right, and you're moving on to React, you're doing something wrong. If you're not comfortable in creating a very basic, stone, paper, scissors game, for example, just in JavaScript, you're doing something wrong if you're moving on to React. So my take is spend a lot of time with these technologies first. If you want, you can start exploring them parallelly. You can start exploring React parallelly, but do not forget to spend some raw vanilla time with these technologies. You know, you can learn React, but you should not forget that JavaScript is also there. JavaScript in itself is pretty sophisticated in terms of things and, and new things which are introduced. Obviously, you do not really need to understand everything, but ES6 concepts, things, ES6 pretty much changed the landscape of JavaScript. So I would say learn as much ES6 you can, because these things like array functions, array.map, array.filter, so these functions reduce stuff like this, array manipulation. Then you have arrow functions, how the this keyword works in arrow functions. So stuff like this will come and haunt you when you're working with React, right? Because there might be an edge case which is not exactly React's fault. It's actually something related to JavaScript, but you would not know it if you're not done with the basics of JavaScript, or if you're at least you're not continuing with the basics of JavaScript. Yeah, so spread operator is also like one of the important things I think people miss out on, and it confuses a bunch of people, because if you're trying to do some massive destructuring, I don't know if how many of you can figure out what the shape of the object is and what the final value of C would be if I give you a nested object. So things like these, you should be able to, at least have this in the back of your mind, that what exactly this is doing. Destructuring, spreading, passing variable number of arguments, default arguments in JavaScript. So stuff like this will take time. Stuff like this you will understand when you actually work with smaller projects, when you're actually creating smaller things. Then once you are comfortable with JavaScript, once you know that you understand the script a little bit, you can just fire up a dev tool console and start manipulating pages. You know that you can do it. Then probably it's time to pick up React. Just like I said, it's not a mandatory thing that you have to master JavaScript and then move on to React. You can start them parallelly, but do not forget to keep learning, right? Do not forget to keep learning. I still discover a lot of new things occasionally in JavaScript, ES 2020 concepts, and that nullish operator which is coming on, and stuff like this. So the language will keep on maturing, and JavaScript will keep on adding new features. You do not have to learn everything, but learn the most common and the most popular concepts. That is super important. Moving on to React, I would say React in itself is something where you should spend, if not same, at least as much, the amount of time which you spend in JavaScript, learning JavaScript, should be React. You should pretty much spend the same amount of time, or at least a little bit more, because although React is, you can say at the end of the day, it's a subset of JavaScript, but the conventions, the practices, and the fact that it does not really follow a lot of, you can say, standard practices. I mean, you can pretty much do one thing in 10 different ways, means that either you figure out a lot of stuff by experimenting and see which one suits you the best and suits the code base the best, or B, you spend a lot of time figuring out how other people achieve a particular thing with React, right? For example, data fetching. For the longest time, I personally also, I'm a victim of this. I'm not going to say I knew it from the beginning. I would do those use effect things, right? With the fetch, and then you set the state. But when you figure out, when you're working with a large application, you would eventually figure out that this is not the best way to go about, because first of all, you're not handling the states properly. What if the network request fails? What if the server sends a bad response? What if the request is kind of slow and you don't really want to make it every single time the component mounts and remounts? So how do you avoid that? So for these libraries like use SWR and React Query exist, right? So figuring out how to work with them is equally important as figuring out how to work with React, because in the long run, they will help you save a lot of headache. They will help you save a lot of time, which you can then spend in either learning or enjoying your life or whatever you want to do. But this sort of investment is something you have to make on your own, right? Then, for example, taking up functional components. This is also like, I'm surprised by the amount of people who still use class-based components for new components, given that you can technically use functional and class-based components together. So if you're creating a new file in 2021 and it is not a functional component, and if you're using React, obviously, I would really like to know the reason why. Why would you, in today's world, create a class-based component when clearly Facebook also has mentioned, React team has mentioned that functional components will be the future of React components. And although class-based components are not going anywhere anytime soon, but still the clarity and the execution model of functional components is much better than class-based components. Just to iterate, class-based components actually mutate the state and props, right? So by mutating, you actually change that object in memory. And functional components, on the other hand, this is like the fundamental difference. Functional component, on the other hand, have a concept of hooks, which you all know about. So hooks return a value, they never really mutate a state, right? So this is like the fundamental difference. But anyway, that being said, functional components are much cleaner in terms of both the hierarchy of components which you see in DevTools, and eventually you'll see that they deliver much more functionality as well. So let me know if you still use class-based components. Doesn't matter if it's a personal project or if it's in your work, and the reason why you do that, right? So that's something I have been thinking about. Then with React within itself, you would see that there are some solutions, like somebody mentioned Tailwind Css. So this is pretty much the tech stack I'm telling you is actually used by codedamn. So you'll eventually realize that this the discussion of this is from my learnings from codedamn, building codedamn.com. So Tailwind CSS is again an amazing but opinionated framework for CSS. I would not really recommend starting with Tailwind CSS because it is very easy to just get stuck with that preset mindset. So I would say not recommended for absolute beginners. You should spend more time with CSS. I do believe you should understand the CSS concepts, the box model, the box model thing, the CSS3 features, like some functions or some CSS3 properties like filters, stuff like this. This is super interesting as well as super useful as well when you're trying to become a front-end developer and when you're trying to copy a design and convert it into HTML and CSS. This is the only use case of CS class-based components, which somebody mentioned. Error boundary might have few edge cases. We have to depend on class-based components only. Yes, this is the only exception I know which functional components do not support yet. So this is one reason you would use class-based components for some things. But yeah, for rest of the components, which does not has a error boundary requirement or error boundary thing, and in fact, you can have a depending on how your application is laid down, I won't really want to comment on that, but your error boundary could be a singular component at the top. But yeah, this is a good suggestion. I almost forgot about this. So yeah, I mean, just like I said, Tailwind CSS is not something I would recommend. In fact, I would not even recommend Material UI at the beginning. I mean, when you're starting off, and you have a couple of weeks experience with HTML and CSS, I would still say do not forget to spend time with CSS. This recommendation is not, just to clarify, this recommendation is not to not use this at all. This is a recommendation to not completely shift your projects to these technologies. That means you just stop using CSS and style files altogether. This is not a good thing in the learning phase, but absolutely a good thing when you're trying to develop production ready projects. So you would know that you would have that inner feeling of confidence that, hey, I'm not good with CSS. I probably need to practice a bunch of more layouts, for example, bunch of more front-end development with CSS and creating those flexbox layouts and sidebars and content and menu. So you would know that, right? And if you feel like that, go back to basics. Go back to vanilla stuff, CSS, JavaScript. Don't really think about that, oh no, now the world is moving forward and I gotta learn Tailwind and I gotta learn Material UI. Because what will happen is that eventually when you are stuck with some specific edge case in any of these frameworks where you want to customize a simple thing, but you do not have that basic understanding, that basic knowledge of CSS, and you don't know how to debug that particular bug or whatever it is, you'll be stuck. You'll be stuck for good. So that's why I recommend taking up these things, trying to experiment, trying to learn with them, but not really relying on them completely as long as you are not confident enough with your basic stuff, with the basic knowledge, right? And HTML is honestly simple. You don't really need to, I wouldn't really say that you don't really need to spend a lot of time. You do need to spend a lot of time, but you don't really need to worry a lot about going into depth of it, because pretty much you just need to learn about tags, attributes, common tags, and not really common tags also, something like block level tags and block level inline tags, things like these. Because I feel like HTML is pretty much owned by CSS. You can do a lot of stuff with CSS in terms of manipulating your HTML document. Iframes is one thing. Then I don't know, some more concepts might be there which I'm forgetting, but more or less HTML is pretty much powered by CSS and JavaScript. So these are two main things which I try to focus a lot on. So yeah, just like I said, start working with Material UI, Tailwind CSS, all these frameworks if you want to, but don't really forget to work with CSS and understanding the fundamentals and making sure that you can recreate, or at least you know how to recreate the stuff which you see without any sort of framework. At least you have the mental model, even though if it appears very difficult, right? So if I ask you, for example, to go ahead and try to recreate this structure right here, this navigation, this simple navigation, this Google Doc navigation, can you do that with just simple HTML and CSS? Just recreating this thing. Assume that I'm giving you the padding and all these values, right? So I'm giving you that this is the icon, this is the structure, this is how it should look like. I will give you pretty much like the padding values or something. You just have to recreate this hover effect and this sort of thing. Maybe if you take a step further, maybe I would also want you to recreate this tooltip effect, which is again a pretty interesting thing to do if you can with JavaScript. So that's how you learn. I mean, if you're starting off, that's how I would learn. I would see that, hey, this widget, this area seems interesting. Can I recreate it in these three things itself? No need to get into JavaScript or get into React or anything, get in Tailwind or Material UI or anything. This is basic understanding, right? If you can do it, you pretty much know your way around CSS. You pretty much know that, you can split this into a single flexbox container, which has this as flex, one of the flex elements. This is a second container, which is a flexbox, which is in the flex column mode, not in flex row, and so on and so forth. So you if you have that mental model, if you can do that, you're good enough. If not, I would say practice that. I would say start working on this before moving on to any other technology. So that's about. Yeah, I can actually read the chat. I am. I'm real. What do you think I am? So anyway, so yeah, I mean, moving on. Once you have the basic understanding of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, React, now this is something where people might differ from me. You might not want to learn React, and you might want to learn Angular, right? Or you might want to learn Vue, for example, right? Or you might want to learn Svelte, for example. But please do not try to learn everything, right? Choose one and stick with it. Now, this might sound a little wrong. So if you want, you can try to experience all of them once. If you want, you can pick up React and spend 2 weeks with it, 3 weeks with it, then pick up Angular, spend 3 weeks with it, then pick up Vue, spend 3 weeks with it, and see which one brings the maximum productivity out of you, and see which one makes the maximum sense out of in terms of technologies. Because what is going to happen is that on the surface, I'll tell you, on the surface, it'll appear that Vue and React and Angular and Svelte are all good, or maybe not. It depends on person to person. But on the surface, if you're using it just for a couple of days or so, you will realize that, hey, everything looks fine, everything looks great. I'm still confused. But when you actually spend a lot of time with these technologies, you'll soon start to realize that, React probably isn't good as what I thought, because, I have so much options right now. And probably I'm kind of the person who wants to go a route where everything is fixed and there are rules. Then Angular is for you. Angular has a very structured way of approaching a lot of things. Angular also has material UI integration, and Angular has its own observables and script subscriptions and all that stuff. I'm out of touch in Angular, to be honest, so I don't really exactly know what's happening in that world right now. But yeah, similarly with Vue. Vue has released Vue 3, which comes with a lot of different stuff, composition API and all that stuff. So just know about, at least try to know about all these stuff, not really understand or use them, but see what is the depth of the framework, how far you can go with that particular technology. And if you're somebody who wants to take an opinion or wants to take a suggestion, I will be biased. Obviously, I am a React developer, so I will be biased to say that try out React. But if you want to take opinion, try to take opinion from people who have been using Angular in production for 4 years, right? 3 years, whatever. Try to take opinion from people who have been using Vue in production. Ask them why they like Vue and why they're not choosing React or Angular or any other thing. So take opinion from all of them. And I'm not really saying like call somebody or something. Just read articles on Google and just Google up Vue versus Angular versus Svelte. Read up 10 articles, open 10 articles in 10 different tabs, and you'll see that few articles are biased toward React because they were written by React developers. Few articles will be biased towards Angular or Svelte because they were written by Svelte developers. So you have to figure out, then mix your own experience of 3 weeks with their 3 years of production experience, and see that, okay, I'm going to pick up React and I'm going to learn it, right? And I'm going to use this as my de facto framework for building projects from this point onwards. Because I'll tell you one thing. It's all fun and games to try and explore a lot of things, and just it's all good that you're watching YouTube videos for Angular, and the next day you're learning React, and next day you're learning Svelte. But it wouldn't take you very far, because when you sit down to create an actual real project, when you sit down to complete some freelancing work, when you sit down for a job interview, which expects you to have web development knowledge, you would actually need to have domain expertise if you want to make something good happen, if you want to stand apart from crowd. Why there is a lot of demand in today's programming world, and not really a lot of there is a lot of demand and there is a lot of supply, but there is no People don't really want to hire even if there are so many developers. The reason for this is that people are just not optimizing enough for the tech stack, which can be useful to companies, right? They're pretty much trying to learn everything. They're following every single guide on internet. You don't really have to follow everyone. You just have to follow a couple of people or a couple of things or a couple of topics which you believe in, and then stick to it. So for me, my recommendation is obviously React. Like I said, I'm biased. I'm a React developer, but feel free to experiment with other technologies as well. So for this stream, we're gonna just discuss about React and technology around it, right? So moving on to like the next thing which I can see is Webpack. So Webpack is surprisingly a very, very dreaded technology among front-end developers. People are afraid of Webpack for some reason, and I understand it because people are usually afraid of things which they don't really understand. So Webpack, I wouldn't say that it is easy, but it is easy if you know the basics. Webpack, at the end of the day, is a simple tool which takes an entry point in your code base and starts with that file, sees that what all files it is importing, goes to all those files, sees that what all files they are importing, goes to all those files, and finally just crumbles it all into a single file or multiple files if you have multiple entry points. So that's the basic crux of Webpack, right? Now all those loaders and all those plugins which you add, and all the Webpack dev server and all that stuff, that is just enhancements, right? The basic thing is Webpack is a tool which can go to a single file or multiple single files and start seeing what all files you're importing. It creates an AST of all that stuff, and we can get a lot technical, but the thing is, that is it. That's what Webpack does. It's a bundler at the end of the day. So learn about Webpack. If you are trying to make sense of Webpack configuration, pick up a Webpack video course or video tutorial. I even have that on my YouTube channel. So learn about it, and then you'll see it'll make much more sense when you're working with options. You'll see that when you're experimenting with more production versus development, you'll see Webpack actually creates remarkably different builds. You will see when entry points is a string versus an array of multiple entry points, you're going to see that Webpack has generated not one, but two files now. So looking up the documentation, experimenting, just figuring out stuff by experimenting is personally my favorite way of learning. You can watch all the video content, you can read all the articles if you want, but unless you are curious about how a particular thing is working, and by curiosity I mean unless you're experimenting with that, unless you're changing those values and then building and seeing how that thing is working, you will not really learn a lot of stuff, right? So that's the hard thing. I mean, people will sell you all sorts of courses. Even I sell courses on codedamn, I sell hands-on practice stuff, but I know that if you do not personally put in the work, if you do not personally have that curiosity or have that experimentation tendency, that is one of the reasons I developed hands-on practice thing, because that forces you to actually go a different route. And maybe I assume that maybe that you will try to experiment that what happens if I do this instead of that. That thing actually helps you learn, because a lot of times you discover something new, something interesting by experimentation. You can't really just read the documentation and expect to understand everything. But if you do something, if you do some experiments, if you are doing some changes to your code base and you see that interesting, that this thing results in a different behavior, then you will actually remember it in a much better way. At least what I have seen that works with myself. I learn a lot quicker if I have a visual of what happens when I do that, instead of just just sticking to pretty much the documentation or the standard video procedure. So yeah, somebody asked how learning Webpack is helpful. Create React app makes things easier. yes, it does make things easier. I'll give you one example of how learning Webpack is helpful from codedamn. So when I was migrating the code base of codedamn from React application, from a standard React application to Next.js, I had a requirement where my Sass files, styles.style.css files, needed to work directly in Next.js loader, right? And I wanted it to have CSS modules. That means, the sites when you see, you go to the inspect element and see all the class names are jumbled. So that feature was already there for React app. But Next.js only had that feature if you appended style.module.scss or style.something.scss. Plus, I had a custom Webpack configuration already in the React application. So if I wanted to migrate my application from React to Next.js and maintain all the features, I could not really do it unless you knew about Webpack a little bit. You knew about how to work with Webpack configuration. Plus, another example I'll give you um, about the serverless deployments, or if you're creating a project. For example, codedamn has a repository for webhooks, which is a repository which listens, which has a code which is deployed on lambdas, and it listens to webhooks for Stripe and Razorpay for payments, right? So what happens is that for creating that code and bundling it and making sure the code is compressed and the TypeScript is turned and everything is happening correctly, and you have all the plugins and all the serverless files are created, I use Webpack, and I cannot do the configuration if I do not understand how Webpack config works or if Webpack works. So right now you are thinking about just a React application, but when you actually understand Webpack, you would be able to take it out of just React and use it in a lot of different areas as well. So it's not like you're restricted to, just Webpack is not just for React or just for frameworks as well. You can pretty much take it out and use it as a custom technology within your own vanilla projects as well, without any framework or anything. So yeah, I think I would take some questions. Will this video will be available afterwards? Yes, this will be. So yeah, I mean, we have an Angular person in the chat. Angular is a great technology. I have personally used Angular a lot as well in the past. So yeah, I know that Angular works and it actually enforces a lot of strict practices, which is really good for enterprise and when you want to have that standard maintained. So I can definitely agree on that. And the learning curve of Angular pays well on the long run. I agree on that as well. These are some good points. I'm not gonna lie, but as it turned out, after trying out React and after understanding the control and power which React also gives you, I kind of incline more towards React. It's not like I don't really like Angular or don't really like to work with it. It's just that I have worked so much with React now that I understand how I can bootstrap an application with it and be up and running with best practices, which I have discovered so far. But yeah, feel free to give Angular a try as well. It's not really about which is the best tool. I believe that every tool can get the job done. It's more about who's using that tool as a person. So do you have the knowledge to do that? But yeah, again, it's just a personal thing. If you're somebody who has been working with Angular for long, I would agree that you would like that. If you're working with React, I would agree you would like that. So yeah. So yeah, moving on to once you have learned a bunch of React, and if you want, you can take a side road and learn Webpack as well. It's not gonna hurt you. You also have tools like Babel and Redux, and then React Query, ESLint, stuff like this, which personally I believe these including Webpack. I won't really exclude Webpack out of it. I personally believe that these tools are actually something I would say are on the need to know basis, right? So we can say need to know learn. cases. So these are the things which you should pretty much focus only if you really need them um, in your work now, right? So you are at a point where, just like I said, you're shifting your React.js project to Next.js or something, and you need to get that Webpack knowledge. So you should not be afraid of picking these tools up, right? So I will include Webpack, for example. I would say ESLint as well to a certain extent. You can just go about and pretty much start creating the best development setup ever with all the linting and TypeScript and everything. But this wouldn't help you become a better developer. These are tools which help better developers become more productive. These are not the tools which help you become a better developer, right? There's a difference. So ESLint is also like one of them. I would say like, try to configure at least prettier, because once you have that nice configuration of prettier, which pretty much just formats your code automatically on saving it I don't know, I just like it. So that's one thing I can say. But other than that, I would even keep Redux in the need to know learn basis, probably because this is not so much required these days, especially with React. This is a hot take. A lot of people are Redux fans, I know, but I used Redux so much on codedamn, and even in codedamn React Native application as well back in the days. So I have been a Redux user, so I know how Redux works. But I have seen the transition happening. I have seen that the use of Redux is not that mandatory anymore in today's web development world, with the coming of, you can say, the context API for React for handling small global states, and especially with the network level caching which these libraries like React Query and Apollo GraphQL and use SWR provide. So my main use case of Redux was for storing data from APIs in central store for components, for central component access, right? For all component access, not really central. So, I would say that I can't say for a number, but I believe that a lot of people will have a similar use case in terms of using Redux, that they get some response from an API and then they store it in the central store, and then they use that, across different components, right? That is one use case. Another use case is like storing application state, like dark theme toggle, for example. So these are like a couple of things which come to my mind. The first one is solved, and is solved in a much better way actually if you use libraries like use SWR and React Query, right? Because why? I'll tell you. Because they can support revalidation of data. They can support actually handling the state of where your request is at the moment. Has it error out? Has it got the data back? Is it still processing? What is happening? So they can do that. They can maintain a very clean structure in terms of making a request, because if you're using hooks and if it is abstracted away by hooks, you would not really need to worry about making the request again. Because even if you do, and if the cache is present, the request data is present, and you want the cache to hit, it will hit and it will return you the response immediately without actually making the request to the backend server. So things like these are, like I said, Redux is a very generic solution in terms of central storage. But if you break it down to its use cases, and then you are able to find very specific solutions tailored to the use cases, then you can get rid of Redux for your application. At least I could do that for codedamn, because these were the two things I was using Redux for. So I shifted this. I think I still use Redux for this. I'm not very sure about the code base. I've not really seen the dark. I actually don't really have dark theme on codedamn anyway, but you can use context for this part, and you can probably use something like React Query or Apollo GraphQL if you're using GraphQL at the backend, or use SWR. There are multiple solutions. I would recommend React Query right? Or use SWR. Apollo GraphQL is specific to, again, to a technology. If you're using GraphQL, then only it will work. But there's that, right? So that's I think another thing. I'm not very confident about rollup. I have not really used rollup in any significant project, so won't really speak on that. Bootstrap is also a good solution, a good UI thing. There are a lot of pre-built and pre-made stuff, and it is a good. I won't really say it's something you should not do or anything like that. So you can pretty much throw in Bootstrap here as well. So it comes down to your choice. I personally prefer Material UI widgets, a few widgets combined with Tailwind CSS. I might shift to Tailwind CSS completely, but I'm still, because Tailwind is complete raw CSS. And sometimes I'm just like, hey, yeah, I just need a table created, and I don't really want to spend so much time customizing all the rows and columns and all the stuff. So I'll probably pick up Material UI, throw in a table, and be done with it. Similarly for icons, which ship with Material UI. Similarly for the drawers and dialog boxes and sometimes even buttons, which comes from Material UI. So that's something which fascinates me, and that's why I use it on codedamn. So that's also something I can recommend. Using Bootstrap is also pretty much similar. I used Bootstrap quite a long ago, but yeah, it works. It just works. It just comes down to your preference of yeah, so after learning the basics of a tool, a really secure project can be delivered by a React Vue user. Those tools don't enforce security, and this is why I choose Angular. I'm not very sure what you mean by security, because React does enforce security, at least in the cross-site scripting world, unless you are using dangerously set inner HTML. Nothing, unless you're doing something very stupid, like not really letting React handle the user data, you would not really see any cross-site scripting attacks as far as I can remember, because React internally sanitizes and parses all the expressions which you at least pass in. But if you have any specific occurrence where you see that React will be vulnerable but not Angular, then definitely let me know. That will be an interesting thing for me. So yeah, I'm rejected from 15 interviews, totally demotivated. Can you suggest something? I would say take a step back and really understand the reasons behind the rejections. A lot of times you'll see that either if you're not even making it to a technical round of discussion, your resume might be the problem, right? A lot of companies use those automated softwares which just filter out resume, and you might have not a standard resume template format or something like that. So it might not be just you, it might be some external factor. So try to extract out as much information as you can from those 15 rejections in terms of talking to people, at least who are responsible. Try to reach out to them if they respond. If not, try to reach out to candidates or people who are working with that company, and they can help you review that. So yeah, after 15, I would say I would just take a step back and figure out where I'm going wrong, instead of just applying continuously. So if there's a knowledge gap, if there's something I can do with my resume, if there's something I need to build more projects, I need to enhance my skill set, I need to reduce the number of technologies which I know and increase the depth of the technologies which I know. So figuring out those things would be something I would recommend. All right, so let's move on. Somebody has said, can you share this document? There's not really a lot of value in this document, honestly. I don't think so, but I'll do that if you want me to. So I will just add this link in the chat if you want to see. But yeah, I mean, it's not that something which I believe at least is not super valuable. It's more about what you do with the knowledge which we have discussed in this session. But anyway, once we have, for example, once we have done this Webpack, ESLint, Redux, all this stuff is there. The next thing I would say, let's see, tools like Post CSS, all these go into need to know basis. You don't have to explicitly learn them as per se. Webpack also, I won't really say, well, we have added Webpack. I won't really say that you gotta be learning Webpack all the time. No, don't really do that. If you think there's a time when you need to work with Webpack configuration and now you're struggling, then learn it. ESLint is, again, like we discussed pretty much. So Post CSS is there. Rollup, I'm not very sure with Rollup. Jquery is an interesting take, especially in today's web development scenario. A lot of people love Jquery. I have used Jquery so much. I have used so much of Jquery pretty much in every single project I made back in 2013, 14. But the fact now is that you do not really need Jquery for a lot of stuff, honestly. JavaScript, especially after ES6 and destructuring syntax and all that stuff, has matured and has become a lot better in the terms. For example, if you want to, okay, I guess we cannot really open the DevTools with shortcuts here. So if you want to, for example, iterate over a document node list. So what you would do is document.query selector, for example, and all the anchor tags on the page called query selector all, right? So Jquery used to make it much easier by just doing $A and then for each and something like this. But honestly, it's not so bad with JavaScript at all. Now you can destructure it, and do a map or .for each or whatever you want, and pretty much get along with it. So JavaScript, I feel, has matured a lot in terms of functionality and in terms of ease of use, that you don't necessarily need JavaScript anymore, necessarily need jQuery anymore, because I believe the only purpose of jQuery was to make JavaScript easier to use, right, and less verbose. And if you do play it right, if you do the things in the right order, I do believe that JavaScript is pretty now. So you don't really necessarily need jQuery, but I would not really discourage you from learning it, because you might learn a thing or two about DOM and DOM manipulation, working with the HTML nodes and traversing the DOM and getting the parents and getting the grandparent and all that stuff, because that is still super important. You do have native methods for those in JavaScript, which are very well supported in all the browsers now. But if jQuery helps you achieve that knowledge, if jQuery helps you achieve that thing, you can and you should learn about that. So that's not a problem at all. So yeah, about jQuery, there's that. Then Snowpack, I believe, is a pretty is in early days, because it uses what do we have, that ESBuild bundler, right? So Snowpack uses ESBuild under the hood, and it's still coming up. That's one thing I talked about in my predictions video as well for 2021, that Snowpack and tools like ESBuild will gain more traction. So you probably, I won't really expect any company as such to be using Snowpack or ESBuild right now, because they are relatively new. They are raw technologies. They do not have a lot of community and ecosystem yet around them, not a lot of plugins, not a lot of support from third-party developers, but they will catch up. I do believe that they will catch up. So yeah, I mean, other than that, Parcel and Rollup and all these external tools, even Babel, I would put in a need-to-know basis. These are pretty much things which you need to learn only when you need them, right? Don't really focus a lot of your time and energy and effort on these tools right away. Just to summarize, just to give you a final picture, I do believe that these HTML, CSS, and JavaScript still is the way to go about for becoming a front-end developer in 2021. it is still something you should start off with. You should not start with some massive 70-hour React.js course. No, that's not the way to go about. Start with small, start with these concepts, and there's plenty of content out there if you want to learn on your own. If you want to have a dedicated learning, all that stuff, you can pretty much go for whatever program you want. But I do believe you can learn these things on your own as well in 2021. That's not a problem. Then yeah, once you're done with basic understanding of this, once you're comfortable enough, you should go ahead and start with a framework. That is important because frameworks help you to minimize repetitive work. You can technically go ahead and do every single thing you see on the web with just these three technologies, but it's just not worth it. It's just not worth writing your own framework, because at the end of the day, if you're building anything complex, you will end up writing a framework, right? Because you need to avoid repetitive work all the time. And why not just use something existing and well maintained, and something that has been there for about 5, 6, 7 years, instead of just writing something on your own. So that's something I would say. But yeah, other than that, I would say dive into a single thing and try to learn all about it. Try to learn, slowly but steadily. Not really just learn everything on day one, but take up projects, take up things which actually challenge you to learn the stuff around those technologies. So for example, with React, incrementally increase the difficulty of your projects. If you're building a to-do app first, then maybe move on to building a simple game in React. When you're building that simple game, think about how you can make it performant, how you can make it run at 60 FPS if it's a computationally expensive game. Learn about a little bit about performance, debugging, how you can make your existing applications better. Then, of course, being a part of a web developer also means some things about, at least for front end as well, some things about networking and how to work with APIs and how to integrate with backends, because you will need that knowledge eventually. So that's somewhere here, getting to know backends, So APIs and, I don't know, something along those lines, APIs and network stabs, debugging, status codes, REST APIs, stuff like that. So you should know about those things as well. Eventually, not really at the very starting, but eventually you should know about those things. So yeah, I think that is pretty much all it really takes to become a front-end developer. Just these few things. Then there's this need to know section where I would say that you don't really need to just go ahead and pretty much focus everything. But if they come, for example, if you need to learn Webpack someday, you should be good enough. You should have the confidence and you should be able to pick up just that particular part and do that. Similarly with Redux, and try to develop that habit of understanding something deeply, no matter how much time it takes. Because if you're trying to just do it, in a single pass thing, that you just watch a single video and think you are the expert, that is usually not the case. You can start working with the technology after watching a single video, but always try and come back and take an opinion, take a view of all the different people in the industry as well. So yeah, that's my take on front-end web development in 2021. So yeah, I think I will just keep the stream till here. If you want, you can also take part in the front-end Accelerator, which will be happening on codedamn, where we will discuss pretty much this tech stack only. I am not sure if I can leave that link here. Let me just see. So the front-end Accelerator will be a 60-day React Accelerator program. Not really React. It's basically a front end where we will start discussing all of the stuff which we have talked. And I'll leave the link in the chat, so you will be able to see the link in the chat. And we will be discussing pretty much starting off from HTML, CSS. We'll be discussing how we can work with JavaScript. We'll be coming to React. We'll be actually covering a bunch of new and important concepts, advanced React hooks, concepts, and patterns as well here. Getting to know backends will also be there. This might be like the first thing, or this might be something which is above all these topics which we have discussed and talked about. So yeah, I mean, there's so much I have planned for this new front-end web developer accelerator 60-day program. We will also have some live sessions where I will be helping you out with things and showing you, and we'll probably do something like this, but in a closed group, and I will be able to take questions from people as well along the way. So if that is something which interests you, if that is something where you want to spend your time in, feel free to join in, and let me know how that works and how that, if you face any problem while joining, or if you face any doubt. So somebody asked, what about backend developer? Can you please make one over backend, especially Node.js? We can do the session for backend web development as well. I'm actually planning a backend accelerator as well, which will be in continuation with this front-end web developer accelerator. So if you're part of this accelerator right now, which you can see on your screen, if you visit this URL, it's also in the chat. If you visit this, you will be able to continue your journey from 60 days front-end to 60 days back-end as well. Hopefully, we'll see what is the duration of back-end developer accelerator. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this stream. I hope this benefited you. I hope this helped you make things a little bit more clear, a little bit, having a little bit of better direction in terms of how you should approach technologies. If it did, make sure you leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and send this video to somebody who has been struggling to learn front-end development and who needs a little bit of direction. I'm going to keep this video short, just 1 hour. And really appreciate everyone who has joined and left the questions. Feel free to leave comments under the video so that I can answer your question if I have missed it in the live chat. And yeah, talk to you soon. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. And I'll see you soon in the next video.